Isn't it so frustrating when you spend hours and hours trying to grasp this one concept, but you just can't seem to understand it? I know it all too well. The anger, the frustration, self-hatred, and despair. And it gets even worse when the next day you go into class and everyone else seems to have gotten the hang of that concept. The same concept that you spent hours struggling on. And that was me for the longest time. Frustrated, unable to learn, hating myself and hating others who seem to be gifted with this knowledge that I couldn't seem to possess. And you'll also remember the good days when just listening in class was all that you needed to do to learn. You never got behind on concepts, and just doing the exercises in class and listening to what the teacher had to say was enough. But now, whatever you need to learn, you've come across this wall, and extra learning out of your own time was required, and so you sought this video. And so here's how to go from the frustrated, confused, pitiful student to the student who seems to grasp concepts easily and never seems lost. Here's what that student is doing. Firstly, they understand what learning is. Learning is a habit, and essentially it's just repeating things until they stick in your head. And by now you know there's many ways to do this. Note writing, flashcard watching, YouTube video binging, study guide reading, textbook highlighting, the list goes on. And to put it into bare bones, all you need to do to learn something is to put time into it. And in a world where your time is infinite and you don't need to do anything else and just study, you could do whatever. You could look at the textbook, highlight, make notes, because sheer amount of time you put in will amount to some sort of knowledge. You'll have learned some things, but you'll know just as well that learning isn't the only thing that you want to focus on. You have a social life, you want to go out with friends, and you don't want to spend all your time doing this, because not only does it make no time for other things, but it's frustrating and it's tedious. And so the way to avoid this late night frustration that you feel when you try and grasp concepts is to start off with the right method. And in my study guide, which you can watch after this, I mentioned all the different tactics, but the ones that I especially recommend, such as past paper questions, and you can go ahead and see why that's the case. And so the best students understand that learning, you need to put time into it. But most of the time, if we really take a step back and look at the times when we felt this frustration, sense of despair, it's when we're trying to cram things because we haven't put the time in beforehand. Think about it. That one time where you had that test in front of you and you try and learn this whole textbook chapter, you sit there for hours trying to read it over, but nothing seems to be going into your brain. And just pause and take a look at that moment. Instead of trying to cram everything in those hours, surely it would have been wiser to space out your time well. Organize yourself a little bit better so that instead of doing 4 hours in the night before, you could have done 10 minutes each night for the past week, and you would have had double, triple the results. Because the best students, they understand that learning is about consistency, and short, regular repetitions are much more effective than cramming. Because not only do you feel this frustration when things don't go your way, you're also feeling the pressure that you have to finish learning this by set date. And so you should be trying to embrace learning instead of forcing, because if you're cramming, that's just aiding your short-term memory. And if you really want to learn to understand concepts so that you don't have to revisit constantly this topic that you're studying, it's much more wiser to be organized and set out your time better. And so this leads on to the second thing that they all understand. All those students, they understand the importance of recall. And in the section before this, I mentioned that consistency and looking over for short amounts of time but consistently is much more effective than trying to cram. And that's because of recall. And I get it, I used to find it so boring as well. After studying, the last thing you want to do is look at the thing again. Surely it won't make a difference whether I look at it again, right? Wrong. Take a look at this graph. This graph basically shows you what happens every time you recall a certain aspect. Each time you recall, it's like you add a knot in the knowledge rope, and so it takes longer for that knot to unravel and for you to forget it. It's proven that even if you just stop to reread the day's worth of learning that you do at the end of the day for 5 minutes, it will not only bolster your learning and your knowledge, it will also increase the time that you remember it for. So you really understand and have learnt this concept. Because sure, you could just cram the night before and do well in the memory quiz, but when the end of years or the more important exam comes later down the line. You're going to have to reinvest time studying the same topic that you felt this frustration for. So why not learn it once and just spend 5 minutes each day recalling this topic so that you'll never have to revisit it again. And our brains, it's true that they have unlimited capacity, but your brain prioritizes things to remember in the long-term memory and short-term memory. So by revisiting something that's already been seen, it's like you're telling your brain that this is something that I want to remember for a long time, because without manually looking, revisiting, recalling these topics that we've learned, there's no other way to tell our brains that this is something that we want to keep hold of. So the action of recall is so important. And the last thing that these students do to avoid frustration, the late nights of self-hatred and going to bed with a sense of despair, is that they never study similar subjects together. Just like you have a push-pull leg split in the gym, subjects can be split into memory-based, problem-based, and interpretation-based subjects. And the reason that you shouldn't try and study subjects in the same category in the same day is that A, it's boring, and B, it's inefficient, and C, it's like you have a skill cap for each section for the memory, problem, and interpretation based questions. And so once you say do 2 hours of biology revision, and biology is a memory based subject, if you then try and memorize French vocabulary, your brain's just not going to have the same amount of patience and brain power it had at the start. And so by doing French vocab and trying to memorize it, your efficiency is going to drop and the amount of actual memorization you can do will drop. And so it's like a mix and match. You're going to try and mix and match different subjects for each day, so that after you do an hour of maths, you do some interpretation based English literature. And although this planning out of your day might seem tedious, spending 10 minutes to plan out each day what you're going to do and creating this good mix of subjects you're going to do can not only increase your efficiency, but make it so you aren't frustrated. Because the last thing you want to do is do maths questions and then physics questions and then the same things, because that's what causes the frustration. Giving your brain something fresh to do not only increases the likelihood of you actually intaking the knowledge, it will maximize your rate of learning. To conclude, remember the goal. You want to learn something, because it's all fun trying to cram something the day before the exam, but with a little forward planning, you can permanently learn a concept and not have to constantly revisit it, because you know all too well, you spend time learning this concept and then a month later, you're learning the same thing because you didn't know how to learn effectively. But now you do. So make sure to understand learning and understand you need to put in the time, and consistency is better. Standardize before you optimize, and understand the importance of recall, and remember to try and plan out your day so that you don't have overlapping subjects in the same category, so that you can maximize your learning and efficiency. And now you're one step closer to being that student, and you don't have to worry about the next day exam while cramming at 3 a.m.